Hey there, Groove Stars, Ridgely here. Super excited to join you on Groove Growth and to talk about a topic that I think is relevant for everybody. I am here with my new friend who is a calm and clarity coach and the founder and current host of Dreams Are Real podcast. And I'm super fascinated by this whole topic. Dan McPherson, thanks so much for taking some time to hang out in the Groove community. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Ridgely. I am glad to be here and always excited to talk about calm and clarity.
You know, you have this thing that you said that struck me the first time we had the conversation, which was the idea that calm, clarity, and focus make up the true path to momentum. And I'd love to just dive in. Tell me what you mean by that. Because obviously I know most of us would say we like to be calm, clarity is important, focus, follow one course until successful, all those things that we've heard. But the idea that it's the true path to momentum, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, this was something that I've been working with for years in broader ways, like in the way that when you're learning a new concept and it takes you a half hour to say it, and I finally got it isolated down to where it's synthesized to calm, clarity, and focus is the only path to true momentum. And the light bulb went off and it all made sense. Well, why did it make sense? It made sense because as I was working with my clients, wherever they were, whatever industry, whatever country, whatever it was, I found that the first thing that I had to do for any of them to get them going where they want is to help them find their calm. I believe that we find our calm, we become the calm, and then we're forward facing. But everything that we do starts with getting calm. If you're anxious or you're upset or you're frustrated or you're caught in your emotions, it's really hard to have clarity about what to do next, what to do now, where to go. And you end up in this place that we all hate to be, which is stuck. And so calm is what allows the freedom of movement. Then once you are calm, once you're able to step back, take that breath and go, whew, all right, I got it. And we get into that objective mind, we can ask the questions. I believe curiosity is the number one skill in the world that we can develop. And we can ask the questions that help us get to clarity of, where do I go next? What do I do? How do I take this path of vision, strategy, tactic, and task and reverse engineer my life such that I accomplish the vision by doing those other things? And that clarity, understanding your North Star and the steps that will get you there, that now sets you up to be able to have focus matter. Because if you're not clear and you try to focus, you're going to do 100 things. When we get to focus, if we try to do, say, 5 things, even if they all go the right direction, we get completely just hamstrung. We get slowed down. There's an example that I share with virtually everybody about this topic, which is if you take 5 tasks, each of which will take you 1 week, and you do them in order, one at a time, then your first one will be done in 1 week. They'll all be done in 5. If you try and do them all at once, which is most of us, right? We get caught and we're like, I'll do a little bit of everything. The first one won't be done for 10 weeks because there's a loss of efficiency. And that's if it ever gets done. Most of the time we get derailed before that. So focus becomes essential. And I believe focus is the number one resource we have in the world, even beyond time, because what you do with your time is what matters. And if you cycle these things, calm, clarity, and focus, always in that order, then that is how you create true momentum. And if you are missing momentum, you are missing one of the steps in that process.
Mm-hmm. So this is pretty fascinating stuff, but let's go back. How'd you get to this whole thing? Tell me, tell us a little bit about the Dan McPherson story. How'd you come to be the calm and clarity coach? Tell us a little bit. I know there's a story of tremendous resilience in there, and I'd love to have you share a little bit if you don't mind.
I appreciate that. Yeah, like so many other things that we learn in life, I learned about calm and clarity by having absolutely none. I went through my life the opposite of that. I grew up crazy. I was hidden from my father for 6 years, and then I lived with my mother in poverty, and we then ended up being exposed to drugs and abuse and alcohol and even violence in a lot of different ways, until I got to this spot when I was 16, where I survived my first suicide attempt. Up until then, it feels like my life was chaos, and I felt lost. I felt hopeless. I felt unheard and unseen, like so many teenagers do. But that's the first of what I would call my inflection points, the space where my life began to change, and where I would say, looking way back, that I started to get a little bit of calm and clarity. From that, I learned two things. I learned that your environment, it has influence, but it's your choices that create change. And I learned that I was meant to help a lot of people. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even figure that out for 25 years, but it was, that thread was sewn there. And then I went to school and I ended up going into sales and becoming really good at sales. And I went into all of this lovely corporate career that everybody goes down the track of in some way or other, it seems. And I moved from frontline all the way up to senior vice president, managing hundreds of millions of dollars in business. But I was never happy. I was never calm. I was always impatient. I now believe one of the biggest shifts we can make in the world is the shift from impatience to eagerness. And I realized 7 years ago that I was just unfulfilled. I wasn't doing the mission I was meant for in the world. And when I did, I had an opportunity where my bosses flew in and they offered me my third promotion in 5 years. And I sat back, looked at them and said, what would it look like if I declined? And I walked away. And that's when I did the next phase, which was actually figuring out what am I meant for in the world, and figuring that out, my mission, my life, going from my North Star to my personal resonance. That is what allowed me to truly find that shift from impatience to eagerness and to get to a space of calm, and then allowed me to share it with a bunch of others and then have them highlight to me, yeah, Dan, this is what you do. This is how you help people.
And how, what do you think then is the biggest block that people run into that prevents them from getting calm and getting clear?
Well, I think the calm is the biggest one in most cases. All three of them have their challenges, of course. But if you ask anybody, what percentage of the time are you calm? Or when you start your day, do you feel calm? When you end your day, do you feel calm? You'll get a high percentage of people that say no. If you ask them, how often do you feel like you're on edge or you're stressed or you're pushed, then they will say that. I think the biggest barrier, the biggest block is that we don't, mindset wise, shift of lens wise, understand that calm is the priority. And so we don't make that the priority. We try to step, just like we do in so many other things, we skip that step. And we're like, I'll just push forward and I'll just do the thing. And we hope it'll work. But because we never got calm, the dominoes never fall. And then we get frustrated and think, I'm just not meant to have the dominoes fall. All of these things are wrong. So understanding first that it actually is the number one priority, that is, I think, really the biggest barrier. Then you can talk about where it comes from and how to overcome it. But until you say it matters, it doesn't.
And how do people do that? I mean, because it seems like we've bought into the story of run, work harder, put your nose to the grindstone. You're not trying hard enough. We bought into all of that runs directly in the face of calm.
We have. And look, I was that guy. I worked 110 hours a week for a year. I worked 90 hours a week for maybe 15 years. I was that guy and then some. I was the guy who wore my busy badge as proud as it could be. What are you doing? I'm busy. I'm doing the things. Was I productive? Was I making movement toward the mission I had in the world? Did I even realize I had a mission in the world? No, but I was running. So I get that feeling. And one of the ways, I mentioned this a little bit ago, that one of the ways that we make that shift is we start understanding the difference between impatience and eagerness. We spend a lot of our life in impatience. Impatience, in my observation, is inward and downward. Impatience is often about entitlement. I deserve, I should have, give me, why am I not there? Even if it's subtle, even if it's not driven completely in ego, and I'll come back to ego in a moment, it is this thing that holds us, and it's really very, very gate or destination focused. It's finish line focused. Whereas eagerness is upward and outward. Eagerness is about learning and earning. Eagerness is not about being wishful of the future or wistful of the past. It's about being in the space where we are and settling into that in a beautiful way, but crafting the present such that we don't have to run away from it to the past or the future. We can be in a really beautiful space. Now, one note, you can work really hard and be really calm, but you cannot work frenetically and be calm. Like that's different. There are weeks that I work 70 plus hours. I call those push weeks, and I don't frankly do them very often anymore. I've learned to find my breath and do other things and create efficiencies and leverage time and all of that. But you can work hard in a push space and still be calm. You cannot be calm if you're just stuck in impatience. And that matters. The second thing, and I would mention this because I think it's very relevant, which is that we don't get calm because we do get caught in our ego, either our ego to impress somebody, our ego to respond to somebody. And a good sign for this is if you see arrogance of any form, unintentional or otherwise. Arrogance is always covering insecurity. Ego is always covering insecurity. So the ego is never the problem. The problem is the insecurity. And if you ask yourself, what is the source of that insecurity, and you resolve that rather than trying to deal with the symptom of the ego, you will find yourself unlocking your calm.
You know, that sounds really good, but it doesn't sound easy, man. That sounds like
hey man, you didn't ask, was it easy?
it sounds like a lot of self-exploration and needing to go within and kind of I don't know, paying really close attention to self and choices and
well, I say this, that two things. One is my company is titled Leaders Must Lead for a reason, because I believe leadership is the keystone of what we do. And when I break leadership down, I break it down into 4 components. And the first of those components is personal growth, because all development is personal. Anything that we're going to do in business, in life, anywhere else, it starts with us. Why? Because the hardest person to lead is ourselves. And so it does start there. Now, we can talk about easy and hard. And I agree with that this isn't necessarily easy, because we have to look in the mirror and face some demons a lot of times, or figure out, like, in an honest way, how do I work? Where am I at? But it doesn't have to be complicated. Like with everything else, the solutions are often relatively simple. When I work with my clients, we'll talk for a little while, and then I'll ask them a couple of questions, and the light bulb will go on, and they'll go, "Oh, that sounds really easy." I'm like, "No, man, it's not complicated, but it is not easy."
There's a big difference there. People get that confused. Just because it's not complicated don't mean it's easy.
Right. It's not often a 10-step plan. Usually it's, this is the core. We've asked enough questions to get to the core. See, that's where people miss so much of this in all of these steps, but particularly in calm and as they're doing the self-exploration, is that we just aren't curious enough. We don't ask enough questions. I find that, and when I train communication, I share this, we talk about it pretty deeply, but I find that the truth typically lies 5 to 6 levels deep at least, but most people only go 2 to 3. And if you think of a simple example of when you're greeting somebody, "Hi, how are you doing?" "I'm okay." "Oh, good." "Well, you say okay, you sound a little off." "No, I'm fine." "Oh, okay. Well, what happened?" "Well, I just didn't have a great day." "Well, when you say you didn't have a great day, what's going on?" "Well, it was just a little bit rough, and somebody didn't talk to me the way I like." "Oh, tell me about that." I'm 5 levels deep now. How often do we do that? Right? Those first 3, they're gone. Well, when you do that with yourself, you don't get anywhere either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is why, so many leaders, if you will, visionaries, will talk to you about, what's your practice, man? What's your spiritual practice? What's your daily practice? What's your, Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar would have that argument all the time about cleaning your mind and really needing to clean your mind somehow. If you brush your teeth and you wash your body, shouldn't you also do something to clear your brain?
Right. And I also think, look, structure drives behavior. You can set up constructs that will make it so that you are more likely to be calm. When I train time effectiveness, I despise the term time management, so I teach time effectiveness. When I teach that and we go into it, I say 70% of this is about seeing time differently and seeing how you approach it. 30% are the structural things that you put in place that allow you to be calm, and 70 or 80% of time effectiveness is about putting you in a space where you're accepting reality in a way and setting up structures in a way that allow you to be calm, because if you do, you'll use everything more efficiently, including all of your resources such as focus.
So you mentioned earlier there were 4 things. The first one was personal growth. Then what?
For leadership. Yeah. So when we think about leadership, we think about personal growth. And then we end up getting to the beautiful things of like connection and team, but we've got to take a stop in the land of attitude first. Attitude is the second one. Personal growth, attitude, because once I'm leading myself, now it's about how do I view the world? Before I can interact with the world, how do I actually see it? What lens am I looking through? Then it's the C. I had this little acronym is pact. I make a pact with myself to lead well, and C is connection. Now, how do I connect with the world? How do I engage with the world? And then finally is the T, which is team. How do I lead others? That has a lot of beautiful, technical, practical things that go with it. But the others are the foundational pieces of leadership that if they are strong and we have those in place, we will lead a team infinitely more effectively. And I should know, because I broke a bunch of teams, not a bunch, but I broke a couple teams when I was younger because I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. It seems as though when I look at those 4, that not only do they build on each other, but they clearly also go together, right? Personal growth is one of those things that is an ongoing pursuit that does affect your attitude. And certainly connection is everything when it comes to the team. So
yes, sir.
I can see that the pact that you're making with self and others is very dynamic and back and forthish.
Absolutely. Look, leadership is dynamic. And that's the part that people miss, is they think leadership is rigid and it's black and white everything. But leadership is about people. Leadership, I had this discussion many years ago. It actually spurred me to develop the leadership training in the first place with a team of mine on a conference call one night. I remember it was a 5:30 conference call. They were all grumpy being there. And I asked them the question, what's the difference between leadership and management? And we got surface answers at first. And what we then talked about it for an hour and a half. It ended up being one of the most valuable conversations we had. And it sparked a lot of things in my world. But the piece that we came down to is leadership is about people. Management is about the tasks that people do. Either way, you're going to deal with the task, but the tenor, the tone, the impact is completely different. And so if you focus upon becoming a leader, which is about people, and oh yes, I'm a people too, right? If I focus upon that, then I will approach the world in a different way. And that's where a lot of what I teach and train comes into, because I'm a heart-centered leader and I teach heart-centered entrepreneurs. I teach what I would call people-first entrepreneurs. And that matters to me. And it is different to be a heart-centered entrepreneur than just to be an entrepreneur. You make decisions differently, you hit different barriers, but you also have so much upside built in the land of people.
So many people, I think, would hear that and they would say, oh yeah,
Yes,
I want to be that. I want to be a heart-centered entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get there?
Well, I like to first say that it comes from the leadership pieces we talked about before. If you look at that pact and you work it in that order and you say, hey, let me go through, whether it be a class or understanding or development in those areas. And that's why I developed the class that I did, to help people get to that space to say, what does this look like? What does it feel like? What is it practically? That if we start to ask those questions and we understand it, then it's easier. Now, at its core, It's making decisions that involve people, that factor in collaboration over competition, that factor in how do I lift people up? How, when I stand in front of my team, do I look at them and say, my job description isn't whatever's written on this page. My job description is one line. Do everything I can to help you win. Because if I do that, I know the rest will take care of itself. It's getting to that space where you treasure that. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore fiscal or fiduciary responsibilities. I believe without profit, we lose the privilege to serve. And I've been fortunate to be very successful in helping people make lots of money and do lots of great things, but it does shape how I make my decisions. And part of that too is understanding, what are your core values? My number one core value in the world is people matter most and relationships are everything. My number two core value is that I will always do what's right, even if it's inconvenient. Well, those two things allow me to be heart-centered, but that doesn't take away that I'm running a business and going to do great things. It just means I will consider the people and act for people first.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's just so important. So I always like to ask this question that stimulates a lot of dialogue. And that is, what are 3 books, tapes, usually books, audios, whatever, that you would recommend to up and coming leaders, up and coming entrepreneurs, young business folks that are out there? What are the top 3 books or top 3 things you would recommend? What would they be and why?
Well, I'm going to give one thing and 2 books, if that's okay.
Sure.
The thing is something that we've heard over time. It goes back to Jim Rohn and others, which is, I passionately believe that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But I'm going to add a tweak to it, 2 tweaks. In fact, the first of those is that you should review that every quarter. You should actually revise your 5 every single quarter, and you'll find some people change in one quarter. Some people don't change for years. I have 2 that have been there for a couple of years, and I have several that change on a quarterly or every couple of months basis. But always look and ask yourself, who do I want to be like? Who can I learn from? Who can I add value to? If you create that mix, you'll be in a great place. The second tweak to it is that it doesn't have to be in person or even one-to-one. For a couple of years, one of my 5 was Tim Ferriss. I haven't met Tim Ferriss in person. I came real close one night at an airport, but I haven't met him. But I listened to 2,000 hours of his podcast, and that was one of the great inspirations and practical, tactical movement pieces for me of intentionally being in that 5. So that's one answer I would give is choose your 5 intentionally every quarter. The books, one of them, I would say Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership. I'm a huge fan of that book. I've probably given away, 200 or 300 copies of it at this point. And I like the audiobook version of it. I just believe that it is core principles of leadership stated in a clearer, cleaner way than I've probably heard it put otherwise. And the next one would be a tie between 2 books.
Before we go there, just tell me, what about Extreme Ownership grabbed you? What was the thing or your personal takeaway or your learning that you got from that?
I got several. I've gone back to it 4 or 5 times at least, if that says anything. And I don't do that with a lot of books. I read a lot of books and I take notes, but for me to go back and buy another copy and go through it 4 or 5 times says a lot. I also ended up listening to a few hundred hours of his podcast. What the first thing that grabbed me is I think even in his first chapter, which is that it resonated with something from when I was younger, which is that it may not always be my fault, but it is always my responsibility. And that connection, that no matter what scenario I'm in, I was in sales for a long time. And when I started in sales, I was terrible. I went out straight commission in-home sales on telemarketed leads. In my first 6 months, I made less than 10 grand and I literally paid to work. I drove 2,000 miles a week and I lost money. The next 12 months was my first 6-figure year in my early 20s. And I threw it away, but I made the money. And when I did, one of the 2 biggest differences was that I went from saying, oh, it's them, they didn't have the money, they didn't want it, they didn't like the color, to saying, I wasn't able to help find the color. I wasn't able to design it right. I didn't find a way to make it affordable, and changed that perspective internally, such that when I walked out, I did everything. I committed to doing everything I could, such that I would never lose to the same thing the same way twice. And that ownership, that bringing that back 20 some years later and changing my mindset to realize it's always my responsibility, even if it may not technically be my fault, it's on me. And therefore I have agency in my success. And that's the thing. I will never again give up the agency of my own success.
Yes, yeah, I love that. And I'm 1000% agree with you. Having that willingness to say it's on me, not on anybody else. And I'm not going to point any fingers because there's 3 pointing back this way, and we'll just go from there. Okay, cool. And number three?
Number three, it's a tie between a couple, but I will take the one that's different than that steps out of the leadership realm and into the sales realm. Never split the difference. Chris Voss. I've also given away probably 100 copies of that. And I've trained sales for 20 some years now. I've read, last count, over 800 books on sales. It is one of the top 2 sales or persuasion books that I recommend to anybody in the world.
And tell me what about that particular piece strikes you?
A couple of things. One is how incredibly clear it is. And I love the premise that when he was the top hostage negotiator for the FBI internationally. And he says, you can't split a person, right? You can't negotiate to get half of a person back. And that understanding that there is a way to get out of this 50-50 mindset. What I love that he does share are these really tactical pieces of labeling and how he can help people to feel good and to actually, you end up with what you need. They end up in a place that they're happy with. Nobody is like sitting there all angry and upset, but yet you ended up creating the win. And there's a particular story he shares. I think it's in the book. It may be in one of his interviews. But I'm pretty sure it's in the book, where after giving a guy back that they had, I think it was maybe in Colombia or the Philippines, that they'd held, it was the Philippines, that they'd held for several months. The kidnapper a couple months later calls in and just says, "Hey, you deserve a promotion. Thank you." like what? Like, how does that even happen? And he is masterful at giving you the tools. This is not a book you can read one time and get all of. My kid has asked to listen to this 3 times, if that says anything.
Oh, very interesting. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Wow. Very, very cool. Okay. So for those people who really want to get on this momentum path, if you were to say starting gate, starting steps, initial, what am I supposed to do? What would that be? Well,
I would say that asking yourself the question first, where in this process, calm, clarity, or focus is my struggle? If you say, oh, it's in more than one of those areas, the earliest one is the only one that matters. Most people are going to find that they don't start out calm. But not everybody. Some people, like, they go through life calm and they just have no clarity of what they're doing after that. Fine. Whatever the earliest point is, do that. The second is, remember the principle that the most difficult thing in the world to do is to overcome the momentum of 0. Therefore, figure out the tiniest, smallest single action you can take within the next hour and do that action. That action could be lifting up a piece of paper. It could be signing something. It could be sending a 1-line email. Incredibly easy, because once you do that, you'll break the logjam of it. And that action will be the first one that comes to your mind. Now, on a broader starting gate basis, ask yourself, why am I not, let's assume it's calm, why am I not feeling calm? What situations do I not feel calm in? And if the answer is all, then we've got some more work to do, right? If it's in this type of situation, then we can start asking, well, what's behind that? Don't accept the surface answer. What are the commonalities? What's behind that? Where does that come from? What is a situation that I do feel calm in, and what's the difference between the two? And that'll begin your exploration. I can do that very quickly with people. Now that I've done it thousands of times, it's helpful. But doing that with yourself, that's a very good place to start. But first, identify the spot that you're beginning and take one simple action so that you break the logjam and get past the momentum of zero.
I love that. That makes complete and total sense. Now, as we're wrapping up today, tell us a little bit about your podcast. Dreams Are Real. I mean, that's a pretty cool title. First of all, where'd you come up with that? Tell us a little bit about it, because I'm going to put the link down here so everybody can go check it out.
I really appreciate that. Dreams are real. It's a theme of my life. It's something I believe passionately. Where did it come from? I was fortunate to be traveling and speaking in Asia about 3 years ago with a group of wonderful speakers. And I was sharing a story about my mother and her passing, which happened to be 20 years earlier. And it was titled Dreams Are Real, Overcoming Our Own Objections to Create the Life We Want. And as I traveled and I shared, I saw the incredible impact that this had. And before that, I'd been more of a professorial speaker. I'd been more of a lecturer, I suppose, than rather a professional speaker, even though I hadn't really fully understood the difference. I saw lives change based upon the power of story. I believe that our story is the only unique thing we have. I believe it's by far the most powerful thing. And I believe that when we share the good and the bad, we can help people. But when we share the ugly, we transform lives. And I sat there with one of my co-speakers who does the back end of my podcast. Shout out to Michelle Abraham and Amplify You. She and her team are incredible, and they do many podcasts. And she and I looked at each other, and I knew I had to do a podcast. I had listened to 5,000 hours of podcasts. I hadn't heard anything like what I believe needed to be done. And so we decided we would start telling the really deep stories. We would go all in. We would take a couple hours, and we would start with, what are your earliest memories? What are your dreams when you're a kid? What are your dreams now? What's everything that happened in between? And we might talk about business for 10 or 15 minutes, but we'd share that story because we knew the business and the life and the love would come out of it. And now we've been fortunate to have people share stories of everything from everywhere and prove that no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what you've been through, there is always light through the darkness, and dreams are always real. And our goal is to really inspire people to take the next step toward their dreams and to give them the tools and inspiration to do so.
I just love that. I think that is super amazing. So everybody, Groovesters, Groove Stars, go check out the podcast. Hit the button below. Check out Dreams Are Real. Listen to some of the amazing shows done by Dan. I always love to ask this question. Final words, Dan, to the entrepreneurs, the coaches, the business people, the listeners who are just looking to learn from you. What would you want to leave us with? Some nugget, pearl, wisdom, something or other from Dan to the world. What would you want to say?
I would say this: you matter. You are valid and valuable. And that no matter how in a moment you may feel lonely or like you're struggling or hitting a barrier, or you may feel excited or on top of the world, we know that this entrepreneurial journey, particularly as a heart-centered entrepreneur, it's challenging, and it can beat us up. It can lift us up. It can move us around. But your dreams are real. Whatever struggles you encounter, there is always light through the darkness. And in those deepest, darkest moments, there is always hope. There's always momentum. And that is because you truly matter.
Dan McPherson, thank you so very much. Guys, go check out the podcast below. Dreams Are Real, founder of Leaders Must Lead, Calm and Clarity Coach Extraordinaire, and my new friend, Dan. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with the Groove community and share your wisdom and insights with the world. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.